Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. My name is Paxton Calhoun, and today I'm very excited to be sharing my thesis research on long-term trends in forage fish populations within Skagit Bay, Washington, and exploring some potential stressors that are causing variations in species abundance. So a quick overview of what I'll be presenting. I'll start with my study goals and research questions, walk through the data sets I used and the trends I observed, and then I'll dive into modeling results and wrap up with discussions and implications. So to introduce this topic, forage fish are a critical component of the marine food web worldwide, and Puget Sound is no exception to that. Forage fish are very aptly named because a lot of things forage upon them, and they really serve as an energy bridge linking plankton to top predators like ESA-listed salmonids, seabirds, and marine mammals, as you can see from my food web diagram in the center. And this study focuses on four ecologically, culturally, and economically important forage fish: Pacific herring, surf smelt, Pacific sand lance, and three-spined stickleback. And I could talk for 15 minutes just about these species, but I do not have time for that. And to give you an idea of how we as humans interact with these species in Puget Sound, herring and smelt are both commercially and recreationally fished in Puget Sound, while sand lance are open to recreational fishing. And stickleback aren't fished, so there's less ecological pressure put upon them, and they've been known to be pretty resilient to disturbances. So we like to categorize them all as bait fish, but I don't think that really does them justice because they all differ in their life history traits, their habitat preferences, their seasonal behaviors, and they all play a foundational role as prey to a wide array of predators. And despite their ecological importance, forage fish remain understudied in this region. There's been a lack of genetic and tagging research done for most of my species. Because herring and smelt do hold economic value, there's been some research done on these fish, at least genetics and tagging wise, especially more than sand lance and stickleback. And additionally, long-term region-wide data sets are limited. So compared to ESA listed species and economically important species, forage fish receive little dedicated funding, and their distributions are often patchy and variable and makes analysis challenging. And this study leverages existing monitoring efforts where forage fish were recorded incidentally rather than as target species, and represents one of the first studies of its kind in Skagit Bay. And for my study goals and research questions, I wanted to evaluate long-term abundance trends for forage fish in Skagit Bay. And second was to examine how environmental and anthropogenic stressors or drivers might explain those trends. And the questions I asked were, what are the long-term trends in forage fish populations, forage fish abundance in Skagit Bay, and which covariates are most related to changes in abundance? And to orient you to Skagit Bay, it sits within Whidbey Basin in the northern Puget Sound, and it serves as a primary connection between the rest of the Puget Sound and the Strait of the Juan de Fuca out to the west. And the Strait of the Juan de Fuca pours into the Pacific Ocean, so it's a major area. And the Skagit River, the main river that is feeding Skagit Bay, supports all 5 Pacific salmonid species and more than a third of threatened Chinook populations within the state. So a lot of things are foraging here, migrating through here, growing big here, and there's a lot of activity, so it makes it very important. And this area has been stewarded by Indigenous communities since time immemorial. Since European settlement in the late 1800s, Skagit Bay has undergone dramatic changes, and this is mostly for agriculture. This is a huge ag community now. And those changes included diking, dredging, putting up flood control structures that have disconnected the wetlands and reshaped estuarine habitats as we see them today. And that legacy of disturbance combined with the recent restoration in the last 20 years, it makes it an ideal place for a long-term ecological analysis like this one. And to look at long-term trends, I compiled 3 major data sets with the help of Dr. Corey Green to look across 2 sampling methods, both surface trawls and beach seines. So surface trawls, they trawl the surface waters, and they tend to catch older juveniles and adult fishes. Beach seines are set in nearshore areas, and they typically capture larvae and younger juvenile fish. So these are really 2 complementary data sets that gives us a holistic view of what's going on in this bay's fish community. Historical data came from surveys in the early 1970s. They conducted bay-wide surface trawls and only conducted beach seines in North Skagit Bay, and that'll come into play in a bit. And more recent data has been collected annually for over 20 years by NOAA's Northwest Fisheries Science Center for the surface trawls and Skagit River System Cooperative for beach seines. And I was able to calculate annual bay-wide abundance by using a model developed by Dr. Stuart Munch at NOAA. Thank you, Stu. I would not have made it this far without you. And this is my figure that shows the site locations for beach seines and surface trawls. In both figures, the red dots represent the modern survey locations, and the figure on the left shows the beach seine surveys. The stars represent the early 1970 data, and the figure on the right shows my surface trawls, and the dashed black line is the early 1970 surface trawl surveys. And as you can see, those 1970s beach seine surveys were only conducted at 4 sites in North Skagit Bay, so it wasn't conducted bay-wide. And while the surface trawls, from modern and historical surveys, they lined up pretty well, which was really exciting to see. And I don't think they planned that 50 years ago, so it was really great seeing that. And so with those annual fish abundance estimates, I plotted them, and these plots show the log transform abundance from surface trawl surveys. The black lines show the modern trend line, or the modern annual abundance, while the dashed horizontal black line shows the historical mean from the 1970 to 1972 data. And the red dashed line shows the trend line. And we're going to start with the top and go left to right on the figures. And for Pacific herring in that top left, we see a decreasing trend over the time series. And sand lance right next to them they show a slight increase in modern years. And on that bottom left is surf smelt. And surf smelt show the clearest decline across the modern time series. And they've now, in most recent years, in the last 10 years, have started to dip below that historical mean. And 3-spine stickleback have remained relatively stable. And so for the beach seine time series, same deal with surface trawls. The black lines show the modern annual abundance, and the red line shows the trend line. And once again, this is where it comes into play. In the 70s, the researchers only conducted surveys in North Skagit Bay, so there is no historical mean line in this figure here. But starting with the top left and going left to right, herring abundance is high and stable across the time series, and does not appear to be declining like we see in the surface trawls. And sand lance right next to them appear to be stable. Surf smelt abundance down on the bottom left appears to have declined more gradually. We don't see as steep of a decline that we saw in the surface trawl data, but still a decline nonetheless. And stickleback abundance appears to be increasing in beach seines. And to summarize these trends across deer types, herring show a declining trend in surface trawls and an increasing trend in beach seines. And this could suggest that there's a strong juvenile presence in the nearshore areas still, and a possible decline in the adult life stages. Smelt have declined in both data sets, and this suggests that the population overall is declining in Skagit Bay. And sand lance and stickleback either appeared to be increasing or stable, so we have a little less concern for what their populations are up to. And to summarize, to better understand what might be driving these patterns, I developed this conceptual model to guide my regression analysis. I grouped stressors into 3 main categories: climate, anthropogenic, and predation. And on the far right are the 4 forage fish species that I modeled individually. The dashed lines with the arrows are hypothesized effects based on my literature review that I thought these stressors are probably affecting these fish. And the variables that have these stars on them are variables that I didn't have strong expectations for. I didn't know how they were going to affect the fish, so I tested them across all my species and all gear types. And I used multiple linear regression to test how each covariate related to species-specific abundance. So this slide shows the best supported linear models for each forage fish species, with arrows indicating whether each variable had a positive or a negative relationship with abundance. Some of these models were lagged to explore whether past year conditions are affecting current year abundance. And rather than walk you through each species individually, I want to call attention to a key theme across these models. So these red circles, they highlight counterintuitive relationships, something that was like, oh, well, that's not really what I'd expect to get from these results. And relationships like the negative association between tidal delta area and herring and smelt, and the positive associations with with seals and birds. It didn't really make much sense to me. But what we're seeing here is likely not reflecting true cause and effect. Instead, they're probably reflecting overlapping long-term trends. The tidal delta has increased over the last 20 years due to restoration. Seal populations have risen since the passage of the Marine Protection Act or the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and seabird numbers in Whidbey have declined. And these are all coinciding with changes in forage fish abundance. And we could also be seeing some indirect ecological effects that aren't direct pressure or direct stress on these fish. So those could be also playing a factor into this. And these blue circles, they show relationships that are more biologically interpretable. The negative effects from commercial harvest, warmer temperatures, and freshwater discharge could signal real environmental pressures. And for stickleback and sand lance, the positive relationship with tidal delta area could reflect an actual benefit or habitat benefit from restoration. So overall, not all of these results point to clear mechanisms, but some of them do highlight meaningful patterns that can inform future monitoring and management. So that was a lot of information that I crammed in there, but some things that I want you to take away from this is that I do think that this study highlights really the broader lack of knowledge that we have about forage fish across Puget Sound. We still know surprisingly little, and there's very little long-term monitoring dedicated to them. With the very little funding that's granted, it's mostly funded towards herring and smelt because of their economic value. And stickleback and smelt receive even less attention. And a lot of what we have, like in this case, comes from incidental bycatch data that was collected during surveys that were not intended for them. And that incidental bycatch data is what made this study possible, and it underscores how rare and valuable these kind of data sets are. And in terms of trends, abundance patterns varied by species. Surf smelt showed the clearest and most consistent decline in both survey methods. Herring declined in surface trawls, but increased in beach seines, and sand lance and stickleback appeared to be stable overall. And across models, the common predictors included tidal delta area, predator densities, and climate variables. However, not all of these covariates were equally meaningful. Several of my models returned counterintuitive results and suggest that in some cases, the models may be capturing shared long-term trends, not true ecological relationships. There could be indirect ecological effects that could be contributing to these trends. So it's important to interpret these results with caution and remember that correlation does not equal causation. And I also found that scale matters. My abundance data are specific to Skagit Bay, so the analysis is assuming that local conditions are what's driving local fish populations. But some of our species are suspected of being mobile. They can move between Skagit Bay, the Saratoga Passage, and even the Straits. And there's been some genetic work done on herring, and we know that they're most likely the most mobile out of these 4 species. And they will migrate around Puget Sound. Smelt are suspected of being more localized. Sand lance may migrate into the Strait of the Juan de Fuca to use the sand fields that are there. But ultimately, we don't know how resident they are. And we have no clue what stickleback are up to. But all of this is to say that because conditions outside of Skagit Bay could be influencing what we're seeing here, this might help explain why some of the predictors that I thought would be like, oh, that's what that means. They weren't as strong as I expected. And finally, I found that gear type mattered. Surface trawls and beach seines sampled different habitat and life stages, and that influenced the results. And using both methods helped reveal a more complete picture and also showed how different sampling methods can lead to different interpretations. And this brings me to my management implications. First, the clear and sustained decline of surf smelt in Skagit Bay is concerning. More research needs to be done to figure out what's going on with this population. And one of those aspects could be recreational harvest, which is a major data gap in Puget Sound. Currently in Skagit Bay, anglers can take up to 10 pounds of bait fish per day year round. But here's the issue, WDFW, they combine smelt, herring, sandlance, anchovy into a single bait fish category. And this makes it impossible to track species-specific catch. And one actionable recommendation is to require recreational fishers to report their harvest by species. A 2015 pilot study done by Dave Lowry even suggested that recreational fishery may have a larger impact on smelt populations than even the commercial harvest. So in the second, once again, some of my covariates were at broad scales that encompass Whidbey Basin, and some were at local scales of Skagit Bay. But once again, some of our species are suspected of being more mobile than others. And it's still pretty unknown for the rest of the species other than a herring. But honestly, we don't really have the data to understand how mobile these fish are. And I believe to better understand population movement, future studies, if funding can be granted, should consider tagging, genetic work, to better track movement and population structure of forage fish. And finally, I feel like this study reinforces the value of long-term multi-method monitoring. And some trends only became clear because we had both surface trawls and beach seine data. And overall, there's just a lot more needed, and ultimately opens the door to more questions that I have. And so I would like to wrap this up by saying thank you to Dr. Corey Green for his guidance, support, and encouragement throughout this process. Thank you to the Skagit River System Cooperative for granting me access to their long-term beach seine data. To Anna Cagley, thank you for being an exceptional mentor. This project would not have been possible without your support and encouragement. Thank you to the faculty and peers that have taken time to read and provide feedback on my project. To my colleagues at NOAA who have been illegally fired, forced to retire, and are still at the Science Center, thank you for your resiliency, guidance, and motivation. And finally, to my fiance and my family, thank you for your endless support, patience, and belief in me throughout this journey. And I'll take any questions that you have.